All right, guys, this episode is on my first fight, MMA fight in the Full Contact Federation uh, event, Rumble at the Roseland, local promotion here in town, January 2002. This episode's dedicated to my coaches and friends in memory of Greg Piper, Robert Follis, and Evan Tanner from Team Quest um, Fight Club here in Portland. Uh, if you haven't heard previous episodes, I had started out in Kempo Karate and studied some Filipino martial arts. I was introduced to MMA and UFC along with the rest of the country uh, through UFC and uh, and started at Team Quest in 2001. Uh, and My friend Jacob Lamb, I had been interacting with him on the MMA.TV underground and learned about Team Quest and got invited to train and loved it. And so I trained there for a year with Greg. Greg, he was also training boxing at Grand Avenue Boxing. And uh, Greg, he was a cardio machine. He was about maybe 125, 130 pounds. He would drive over from Portland out to Gresham with his hand wraps on. So he'd do boxing out for hours and then come out and teach class. Um, and there was just like a handful of us, uh, like students, and there were just like half a dozen pros training twice a day. Nathan Quarry was there, uh, Matt Linland, and Randy Couture, and some other guys. But Chael Sonnen and Kevin Keeney, they were getting ready to start Rumble at the Roseland, um, and I had come from karate, um, and was used to being tested for the next belt level, learning, making progress. Back then, Team Quest was heavily influenced by Straight Blast Gym and Matt Thornton and that group. They, they were wanting to do away with formality and tradition. So we didn't have belts. You didn't call your instructors professor or sensei. You don't didn't bow to each other, didn't bow onto the mat. Kind of did away with the traditional or rituals and things like that. They were just focused on winning fights and finding what was um, stripping away in technique that was not realistic, and just um, focusing on what Matt Thornton called like the fundamental delivery systems of Muay Thai, wrestling, and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And um, so uh, after training MMA for a year, Chael was talking about that. I was like, oh yeah, I'll do a fight. I want to do that. Um, so say a little bit about the training. Um, Greg, he was training boxing. He eventually became a boxer. He would do amateur fights. He went to Japan. I think he went to Hawaii and did a super brawl. Um, but some of the guys like Brian Stromberg, he was a big dude from Straight Blast Gym. He would train with Randy uh, and Matt and some of the guys, the pros. But Greg, uh, he he was a smaller guy, and back then there was not lots of people training MMA. I remember early on we went up to Matt Hume's gym up in Washington, north of Seattle, and he fought a guy like 25 pounds heavier than him. Um, so MMA was rough for Greg. He was always down to scrap. Um, very influential to me. Like, just always being willing to, don't matter your size. He he loved to fight. Um, but becoming a pro boxer was more helpful to him because he could find more opponents his size. Um, so what was training like back then? Yeah, we didn't train with a gi. It was MMA, Vale Tudo. Um, a lot of our training was up against the wall, um, you know, uh, ground and pound, defending ground and pound, combat jujitsu. If you've seen that, watch that. That that's a lot of our ground game. Our ground game was pretty like rudimentary fundamentals. Like, if you've seen the Mario Sperry Vale Tudo series, one through three, that was a lot of what I was learning. Mario Sperry Vale Tudo one uh, is a lot of the functional MMA techniques, clinch, um, dirty boxing that we were training back then. So, uh, Chael put together the FCFF. Back then, there was Victory Athletics and Matt Hume's group, some other people, uh, 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 Dennis Hallman, Benji Raddick. They would come down to train sometimes. Um, some of there was uh, a group in Eugene training, Oregon Dog Pound, um, and who else? JT uh, Thomas, and then some Oregon Jiu-Jitsu guys. So there was like 4 to 6 MMA gyms, like between Washington and Oregon, that were competing in these events, and early on. This is before the Ultimate Fighter, and and I had seen some events at the Roseland on film, like on Straight Blast Gym's instructional series. Seen some clips, you know, being held in warehouses and MMA and boxing rings. No cage. Um, but or it had become unsanctioned for a while, and so the Rumble at the Roseland one in 2002. It was it it had gotten approved MMA had gotten approved to happen again in Oregon. Um, so we went down there to the Roseland Theater, and as we were walking in, there was a camera person and a reporter that were walking up right behind us. And I started talking to the reporter. I was telling her about Evan Tanner, and how he was in the UFC and how he was self-trained, and he had come out, I think, from Texas to train with Team Quest, and how she should talk to him. And but we went through the rules meeting and the weigh-ins, and it was a lot of fun. Uh, I didn't compete in wrestling. In high school, so I wasn't used to like fight day. I competed in karate tournaments, but this was down in the basement of the Roseland Theater. There was some time between the weigh-ins and the event that night, and so I had a chance to watch some video of my opponent that afternoon, and and I was like, oh yeah, I was feeling pretty confident uh, that that I had better stand up, and so I was feeling good going into this fight. It was funny. I overheard some friends talking to him. This is Joel Townsend from Seattle, and shout out to Joel. Thanks for the fight. But his friends were teasing him because my last name's Penn. They're like, "Oh, dude, you're fighting BJ Penn's cousin." They're just messing with him, and it was funny to overhear that. Um, I went into the cage. I had we didn't have a cage set up at Team Quest yet. Um, so I got into the octagon there, and I was like, "Oh, now I'm nervous." I wasn't nervous at the weigh-in, but well, getting in there and moving around, I was like, "Oh yeah, I'm nervous now." So uh, the the fight, it was on like local cable, um, and what I found out later is that the show the reporter decided to follow me. It was kind of like a local interest story or something. um and they showed me warming up. They showed the weigh-ins, and they showed the fight in its entirety because the fight was only like 21-22 seconds long. um Later on, Randy, Coach and Coach Franklin, a local wrestling coach, they were the announcers. And by the time they talked about the introductions, um, and a little bit of background, they panned to to the cage, and I'm getting armbarred. The introductions were longer than what you see on screen. So later on, you can see the fight in its entirety on the 10 o'clock news. Um, so uh, back it was a pancration rules match. So so this match, it was like combat jujitsu rules. It was like open hand strikes to the head, and then punches to the body, and then we were also wearing like shin pads. And so it was a fun short fight. So I'll describe it. um, the uh, Threw a couple front kicks, uh, uh, threw a couple palm strikes. It's like pancrase. Um, uh, he shot for a double leg. I sprawled, hit him a couple times. Uh, but he kept going for the reshot, kept going for that takedown. I got up against the fence. He ended up coming on top. I don't remember if he got mount, but he swung for a spinning armbar. He must have got mount. Matt Linland was the ref, and he saved my arm. um after So I headed back down to the locker rooms downstairs. And right when I got down to the bottom of the stairs, the reporter comes running up to me, and how was it? And I said, the adrenaline was still flowing. I said, "Oh man, that was fun. I loved it." Even though I lost, it was wild to get in there. Before uh, uh, the fight, just standing there, fog machine, lights, uh, that it was intense. And then feeling the cage door lock behind you. Um, and it's fun. The Roseland venue, it's got two levels. It's like a concert venue. So the floor level and then the balcony. And just being in the cage, it felt like the people in the balcony, it felt like they were like right on top of you. Like looking down, they're pretty close looking down into to the cage. Uh, you know, uh the white mat. So it's just bright, just like the intensity. It was awesome. Uh, the uh, so Lost that match pretty quick. So after that, I was like, man, I gotta up my grappling game. So I had been there at Team Quest for a year. My opponent was a purple belt in jiu-jitsu, and so the grappling discrepancy, I paid for it. So, but after that, I got I I thought I need to do every jujitsu class. Robert Follis had came over from Straight Blast Gym, and I studied with him, and uh, and then took a second fight later that year. Um, I think I'll do another separate episode uh, about that second fight. Um, but uh, w- so as a jujitsu student now, how how can this help you? Um, well, what can I say? Um, One thing that Straight Blast Gym back then was known for was um, a live training, instead of doing dead patterns. And so it's funny, 20 years, like now, you'll hear a little bit about an uh, ecological approach to training, or game based trainings, these different scenarios, like, like a type of isolation sparring. Um, and Matt Thornton was a proponent of this type of training, 20 years ago. It's kind of like circled around. It was interesting, as 10th Planet and Eddie Bravo were becoming popular. He was talking a lot about like drills, and then learning like half guard sweep, like step by step move, and um, that type of drilling. And um, the ecological approach, or game based, it's starting to get popular again. But that was something that was appealing to me, coming from traditional martial arts, where we would like spar, um, you, um, or drill technique, like pretty cooperatively, um, and it's kind of like a dead pattern, right? You like feed a jab and keep your arm out there, and then do, like five different moves while your partner, your opponent stands there. And so more alive training, that um is something that was kind of uh like an evolution or next step for me, in martial arts and learning martial arts. And I just remember Greg, he was training boxing. uh he had a taekwondo background. He was a blue belt in jiu-jitsu, with Straight Blast Gym. And I had been training karate for years, probably at that point, like 6 7 years. So black belt in karate, he's blue belt in jiu-jitsu and a little taekwondo. And it was, I was having a hard time doing Muay Thai, like, kickboxing with him. And I was just like, oh man, like, it was hard not to feel like I had wasted time. Um, no disrespect to uh, my friends who are studying Kempo, but that like, UFC, back then, MMA, UFC, it's just like everywhere now. But back then, it was a martial arts revolution. And uh, you know, um, spending a lot of time sparring, point sparring, 2 rounds, boxing rounds, Muay Thai kickboxing rounds with Greg. Um, Most of the guys were big back then. So I mainly sparred with Greg, or guys who were bigger. Dennis Davis hadn't come over from Straight Blast yet, and hadn't we didn't have the influx of people starting MMA. Uh, but uh, yeah, instead of pulling punches, like in point sparring, you get penalized for contact. If you hit the head with a back fist. And um, sparring with Greg, you got to pat the jab, you got to slip, you got to cover up because he's trying to punch through your head. Um, and so that, for me, that was a lot of fun, because I mentioned early on in the podcast, like, I loved boxing growing up, and so finally learned how to box. Um, it was fun. At one point, Greg, he had turned pro, and he's like, it was a big compliment for me. He's like, your hands are like amateur level, amateur level boxing, and so that felt good to develop uh, my stand up to that point. Um, and for me, like jujitsu has evolved. And ADCC, IB, JJF. You know, it's uh, grappling without strikes. Sport jujitsu is huge, um, and it's it's the next chapter. Um, but uh, I I like to what is that? Wave the banner, um, of keeping jujitsu. Uh, keeping the street roots of Vale Tudo. You know, uh, i- if it's fun to cross train. Um, it's fun to learn how to box. I love boxing. Um, but it's hard because time. It's hard to be good at everything, right? It's hard to spend a lot of time. Uh, Early on at our gym, uh, well, at Team Quest, it was just MMA classes. There were no separate Muay Thai, boxing, wrestling, and Jiu-Jitsu classes. It was just MMA. And some of these practices, it was just fighting. Some of the best fights I've seen were not on UFC, on pay-per-view. It was, Ed Herman, Chris Lieben, like just pounding on each other. Great fights. Um, Dan Henderson when he would be preparing, um, just you know, H bombing people, the younger guys, the guys that uh started coming to the gym after FCFF. Um, oh, one fun story from the first fight. Later on, s had a patient from Kaiser call into. Uh, she told me she had called into the station because I I had been her sleep tech, and she's like, "Wait, that's Savan from Kaiser. He's on TV getting beat up." Uh, um, yeah. So that was my first fight. Um, you might not have the inclination to do an MMA fight or combat jujitsu fight. Um, but if you're a jujitsu student, I encourage you to think about competing and testing yourself. Um, you, I was see the you know I I got my arm caught that day, that night, but I was really proud of the training I had done preparing for that. Like signing up and saying like I'm gonna do this, and fun to be part of an inaugural MMA event in Portland, Oregon for coming back. um and I had no regrets. um Sometimes people worry about competing because they're worried about uh being criticized, being humiliated, fear of failure. um but uh especially now, like, that was 20 years ago. These days, online people are mean. Um, uh, but what I've found is that people uh, are are more curious about the training. You know, people don't criticize me for losing that first MMA fight, and so I encourage you to compete if you're a jujitsu student at least once, um, and to to test yourself. Right? It's not the critic that counts. That Teddy Roosevelt um, quote. Um, but dare greatly. You grow a lot through competing, and I'm glad I did it. The you learn about yourself. Face your fear. Um, it's a good thing. Um, to try. And yeah, it it was it was a lot of fun back then. Um, I remember. I'll tell you about the second fight, but I remember one time we went over to Evan Tanner's place to watch some fights. So we watched one of his fights in the UFC, and that he had won. And then they queued up uh, my second fight, um, and we watched it together. Uh, good times back then. And it's fun to see the FCFF Rumble at Roseland still going strong after 22 years. See Chael's success as a promoter and fighter eventually, and then also some of the younger guys that made it to the UFC and other promotions. All right, Jiu-Jitsu. What to say more? Um, uh, Yeah, clinch, Greco. I'll say more. We'll break down technique. I'm gonna ask Chris Standing, one of the coaches. He trained at Team Quest as well, um, and I'm gonna ask some guys to come on and talk a little bit more about dirty boxing and clinch and takedowns. So stay tuned, guys. We'll get to take technique here pretty soon. But that's just a fun story about my foray into MMA and how I just started uh, in jujitsu. Um, uh, Good times uh, back then. All right, guys. Thanks for watching. Sorry, kind of rambling today. Um, it, it it was fun to tell the stories, but I kept remembering my friends, Greg and Evan, and next time I'll say a little bit more about my friend and coach Robert Follis, who cornered me for my second fight. All right. Until then, guys. Hope your training's going well. All right. Thanks for watching. Us.